Today's Washing Tech episode is brought to you by Audible. Get a free audiobook download and 30-day free trial at washingtech.com/book. Over 180,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or MP3 player. And also Warby Parker. Get a free 5-day home try-on at warbyparkertrial.com/Joe. 5 pairs, 5 days, and the try-on is 100% free. That's warbyparkertrial.com/Joe.
We have moved from a physically centralized and expensive network to a virtually distributed, less expensive to operate network that has now led to a new kind of virtual centralization of activities on the network, such as Google, Facebook, Amazon, and the services that we all know about.
Welcome to the Washing Tech Policy Podcast. We deliver the latest tech policy news and brightest tech policy experts to you, wherever you are, so you can stay productive, relevant, and informed in less time. From Washington, D.C., it's the Washing Tech Policy Podcast with Joe Miller.
Elizabeth Warren proposes breaking up big tech like Facebook, Amazon, and Google. House Democrats introduce a new net neutrality bill. And Tom Wheeler is my guest. Hey, y'all. Senator Elizabeth Warren announced her proposal last week to rein in tech firms like Google, Amazon, and Facebook. The plan calls for potentially breaking up some mergers as well as new legislation. Senator Warren wants to break up DoubleClick and Google, Facebook and its subsidiaries Instagram and WhatsApp, and the Amazon Whole Foods merger. Politico reported Monday that Facebook removed ads that Elizabeth Warren placed on the social network, which criticized Facebook and called for its breakup. Facebook backtracked after its attempt to silence Warren backfired. I don't get it. Here we have a company for the past year has been fighting all of these scandals and allegations of misuse of data, comments about how Facebook plays a role in speech. And then you have Elizabeth Warren put up an ad that's not favorable for Facebook, and then Facebook takes down the ad. I don't understand. I just don't understand how Facebook makes these decisions. It's just mind-boggling. Nancy Pelosi, on behalf of Democrats, introduced a new net neutrality bill last week. The bill is 2 pages long and would simply reinstate the 2015 open internet rules. The bill's likely to pass the House, where Ds hold the majority, but it faces a more uncertain future in the Senate, and getting it over the president's desk is likely to be a challenge. Trump's re-election campaign is proposing a plan that would give the government control of the nation's 5G airwaves, allowing it to lease them out to carriers on a wholesale basis. Most carriers think the plan's unworkable, but the plan is seen as an attempt to attract rural voters with spotty internet service. Chinese device manufacturer Huawei, which the U.S. government is accused of spying and violating sanctions against Iran, has now sued the U.S. government for banning the company from doing business in the U.S. The company filed in a U.S. district court in Plano, Texas, where the company has its U.S. headquarters. T-Mobile's expenditures at Trump's D.C. hotel rose sharply after the company reported that it would be seeking to acquire Sprint. Since April of last year, when the merger was announced, T-Mobile has spent $195,000 at the hotel. But before the merger announcement, the company said that only 2 employees had stayed there. The FCC paused its review of the merger last week. This is the 3rd time the FCC has paused 180-day shot clock, which is now stuck on day 122. The merger review has been going on for 8 months. It's not clear why it was paused this time, but the hotel expenditures may have had something to do with it, especially since the White House actually approved the deal. I wonder why. Finally, The Hill reported on Monday on a new app that launched, which gives users a listing of MAGA-friendly establishments, places where they're least likely to be made fun of or harassed for wearing their red MAGA hats, or that let them carry legally concealed weapons. Check it out. It's called 63 Red. Great way to figure out where not to go other than Cracker Barrel. Events. The House Energy and Commerce Committee, Comms and Tech Subcommittee, is having a hearing on legislating to safeguard the free and open internet. That's today at 11. That's Tuesday, 3/12 at 11 in Rayburn, 2322. Also, later today, we've got a House Energy and Commerce Committee, Comms and Tech Subcommittee on the impact of broadband investments in rural America. That's today at 2:30, and that's in Hart Room 216. Then on Thursday at 9:30 a.m., we've got an ACT event, Voters to Policymakers, Bridging the Digital Divide, includes unlicensed spectrum, and that's in Dirksen Room 562. And then on Friday, we've got the Federal Communications Commission's monthly meeting at 12:30 to 2:30 at the FCC. And you can find links to all these stories, including the events, in the show notes. And our handle is at Washing Tech for the Twitter feed, where you can find these stories as well. Stay with us. For Washing Tech Policy Podcast listeners, Audible is offering a free audiobook download with a free 30-day trial to give you the opportunity to check out their service. You can listen at the gym, in the car, or on your morning run. How about The Square Tower by Niall Ferguson? You can download The Square Tower free by trying audible.com. Sign up for your free audiobook and 30-day trial today at washingtech.com/book.
You're plugged into the Washing Tech Policy Podcast, the inclusive voice of tech policy.
My guest today is very distinguished. You can find the full bio in the show notes, but long story short, he's a Brookings visiting fellow currently, and previously, as you know, he served as FCC chairman for the second half of Obama's term, and he shepherded through, along with Gigi Sohn and her team, the 2015 net neutrality rules. Prior to that, he's been the NCTA president, CTIA's president. He's a distinguished author and entrepreneur, and has even served on the boards of the National Archives Foundation and Public Broadcasting Service. He's a proud Ohio State grad where he earned the Alumni Medal. Tom Wheeler. So this book, your new book entitled From Gutenberg to Google, The History of Our Future, kind of lays out for the reader a lot of what animated your work, both as FCC chairman during the Obama administration, now as a Brookings fellow. History repeats itself.
Yes, it does, or at least, as Mark Twain said, it sometimes rhymes. And what made the FCC so interesting was that I had been studying the effects of network revolutions, and suddenly I found myself making policy in the midst of one.
So give us a summary of your book here.
Well, Joe, I think there are two themes that run throughout the book. The first is that new technology, what we consider to be, quote, new, unquote, technology, really isn't. It's part of an evolutionary process. And that the second part being that new networks are using those new technologies are by nature destabilizing for both society and the economy. And the lesson to take away from both of those is you can't run away from that change. So consider, for instance, the evolutionary impact. If you unpeel the onion that is the TCP/IP code, the code of the internet and digital networks, for instance, you will eventually find what is the same thing that is at the heart of Gutenberg's printing press, which is breaking things down into their smallest units so that they can be disassembled and then reassembled again later. If you look at the impact that new technologies have had, it challenges the thought that we're fond of saying these days that, oh my goodness, there's never been change like this today. Well, consider, for instance, the middle of the 19th century, when the railroad became the first high-speed network and destroyed geography and distance as controlling factors of life. And then right on top of it, the telegraph became the first electronic network and made information instantaneously available at distance. And those two things gave us the Industrial Revolution, and the Industrial Revolution totally upset the economy, totally upset lives, and we had to come up with a new set of rules. So the theme of from Gutenberg to Google is that, yes, we have seen technological innovations before. Those innovations do bring us to today, and that the lessons that we learn along the way are applicable to our challenges today.
So you did an analysis of Darwin. You compared the evolution of technology to Darwin's theory of evolution when it comes to species. And he talks about evolution in a couple different ways. He talks about interspecies and how they evolve over time, and then intraspecies, which is more a function of the conditions, like things that Guns, Germs, and Steel talked about, Jared Diamond's book, where he talked about people who lived in the Fertile Crescent having access to food and water and being able to grow from there. So you have that discussion, which is a discussion I think you contribute to in your book.
Yeah, I think you're right, Joe. I use Darwin as a metaphor. He talked about the steady accumulation leading to the change. And I think there's a steady accumulation of innovation that has led us to the point we're at today.
And you discuss a bit about how network economics have changed over the years. What do we need to know, Tom, about marginal cost and when we compare new networks versus old networks? And what are some of the implications for how we should craft public policy?
Well, the network economics have changed a lot. As you say, they both to build and operate, the costs of networks are coming down. We remember the central offices with expensive real estate in cities that was required for the telephone network, for instance. That's now all been virtualized with software. And the interesting thing is that delivering incremental data is almost costless. One of the things I talk about in From Gutenberg to Google is that there is one estimate that delivering a megabit file, a million-bit file, costs less than 1/10 of 1 cent. And so what that has done is we have moved from a physically centralized and expensive network to a virtually distributed, less expensive to operate network that has now led to a new kind of virtual centralization of activities on the network, such as Google, Facebook, Amazon, and the services that we all know about.
And so given that, what are kind of 3 or 4 key trends that you see happening in tech and telecom over the next 5 or 10 years?
Well, I talk about 4 specific trends. I say that we haven't yet had a network revolution equivalent to the 2 previous ones, Gutenberg, and then the 1-2 punch of the railroad and the telegraph, but that we're on the cusp, and that there are 4 things that are going to drive us across that cusp. One is Web 3.0 and the new nature of what networks are going to be like, because for as long as anyone can remember, networks have always been a transportation function. You move something from point A to point B. Now we have ubiquitous coverage and low-cost computing that means that the network is nothing more than a collection of smart computing capabilities. And we'll see the network evolve from transporting to orchestrating information. The second, of course, is artificial intelligence, which is again the marriage of low-cost computing and ubiquitous delivery. Because what is artificial intelligence? It's dipping into a lot of databases to feed an algorithm to make a good prediction. The third is blockchain, and blockchain is the redefinition of trust, that you move from a centralized provision of trust to a distributed provision of trust, similar to the distributed network. And then the fourth is the cyber threat, and that we have to understand that networks have always been attack vectors, and we should be anticipating and planning for that now.
Absolutely. And to your point on the algorithms, it kind of ties back to our discussion briefly about Darwin earlier, is that, we need as policymakers to be careful about who's developing the algorithms and what sorts of biases and how they interpret Darwin, for example, that goes beyond metaphor.
Well, Joe, but the other part about it is we have the algorithms. It's not necessarily who's developing the algorithms, but it's what's going into and coming out of the algorithms. And one of the things that I've proposed is we need to have open APIs so that it is possible to see what's going in and what's coming out. You don't need to see the special sauce that is the algorithm itself, but you need to know what they're doing. You pick up the front page of the Washington Post, and you see the results of that editorial decisions, and you can make a decision as to whether or not they are this way or that way on the political spectrum or factual or whatever. You don't have that kind of capability when an algorithm makes the editorial decisions and ships it off to a select audience.
Well, theoretically, you have that on Fox News too, though. So you have Fox News reporting on the news, but then there are all these influences happening behind the scenes where no one's really sure if it's, the extent of the White House's involvement in shaping what they report on.
No, but I think you've seen that. I think that the reporting has covered that fact, including the recent great Jane Mayer piece.
Well, thanks for joining me, Tom. It's been great. And I think we owe you some thanks, and Gigi and your team, really, when you were at the FCC as chairman, around getting the open internet order done 4 years ago. You gave us a lot to work with, and I think we're on the 1 yard line with that. You hit a touchdown. Now we're back on the 1 yard, but that's fine. We got a penalty. But I just want to thank you for your work there.
Well, you're right about Gigi, and let's keep pushing.
Now let's turn to your icebreaker, your career advice, and your pick for our book this week. Okay, so it's time for this week's icebreaker. You ready?
I'm ready.
Okay, who's your hero?
My wife, Carol, who I write about in the acknowledgments, who's the wisest person I know. But if you want to talk about a public figure, I think the current occupant of the Oval Office makes us long for the days of deliberative, fact-based decision-making and personal integrity. And there are an awful lot of recent occupants who meet those tests, but of course my favorite is Barack Obama.
If you could carve out the day for a tech policy professional, especially one who's just starting out, they come to your, maybe they're a mentee. If you could carve out their day so that they're successful in their role, how should they be spending their time?
Wow. That's a really great question, Joe. I was privileged to give the commencement address this year at the Rochester Institute of Technology, and I said to all these new young engineers going out into the world to make time for humanity. And it's not just about technology, but it's how that technology applies in a world of human beings, and we have to understand each other's technology. So I would hope that tech executives would spend less time reading about computer science and more about the liberal arts, especially history.
And we've got your book, of course, which we're linking to in the show notes. But what are you reading these days?
Well, I have a peripatetic reading style. I'm reading multiple books at the same time. I'm reading Lynn Olson's new book called Madame Forsade's Secret War, about the woman who ran the spy network or the resistance network in France in World War II. I read everything that Michael Connelly writes, often several times. I love Harry Bosch. I'm reading Neil Ferguson's The Square and the Tower, which is also about networks. And then I've got other books that I read for special topics.
Well, thanks again, Tom, for joining me. What are some takeaways you'd like to leave with us, and where can we find you online?
Let's end where we started, with Mark Twain, and that history rhymes, and that we're facing challenges today, and the lesson of what made America great was not that we retreated from the challenges we had in the past, but that we stepped up to them and dealt with them, and that's what we need to be doing right now. You can find me on Facebook, or my Twitter handle is TE Wheels.
And you've been listening to Tom Wheeler, former FCC chairman and now visiting fellow of governance studies at Brookings. Tom, thanks for joining me.
Joe, thank you. It was a pleasure.
That concludes episode 177 of the podcast. Thanks so much for listening. If you like what we do, we'd love to hear from you. Please take a moment, head over to Apple Podcasts, leave a review. It helps others know what they can expect from the show and really helps us out. Thanks again to all of you for listening, and I'll see you back here next week. Take care.
Washington Tech.